Welcome to Crossroads. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency is shutting down 2 offices in China. Now, this could be a troubling sign that efforts to stop the flow of chemicals used in drugs like fentanyl may have hit a wall. According to AP, DEA Administrator Ann Milgram told agents in an email last week that these closings reflect the need to harness DEA's limited and strained resources to target where we can make the biggest impact in saving American lives. Now, allegedly, the DEA is looking to close a dozen or so, more offices around the world, and also reduce its current global count of 93 offices in 69 countries. Now, AP also says this. They say DEA veterans say it marked yet another setback in the often halted cooperation between the 2 geopolitical rivals, the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. It notes that even though China has added dozens of fentanyl-producing chemicals to its list of controlled substances and warned companies against shipping them, the country remains the world's largest source of precursors, and fentanyl crisis is blamed for nearly 100,000 U.S. deaths every single year. It notes it took years of U.S. requests before China even agreed to allow the DEA to open offices outside of the capital of Beijing in 2017. It notes that hopes were high for its 2-agent office in Guangzhou, a major center for trade and organized crime, and a similar outpost in Shanghai, the country's financial hub. Now, look, this could actually be a sign that U.S. attempts to work with the Chinese Communist Party to try to shut down fentanyl trafficking may not be working. This was recently discussed between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. As we noted, they actually added some of these fentanyl ingredients, you could call them these precursors, to their list of banned substances. But the CCP didn't actually do anything to stop it. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party is essentially the mastermind, the kingpin behind the global drug trade. This was true with cocaine, it was true with methamphetamine, it's true with fentanyl, it's true with a lot of other drugs as well. This was launched under a program of Mao Zedong where he talked about the people's opium, modeling a drug war after the Opium War, which Europe again used to basically end the last Chinese dynasty. Mao Zedong modeled a similar drug war against the United States. Fentanyl is a weapon of war according to the CCP itself. In fact, drug warfare is even included on its military's unrestricted warfare doctrine. They openly say this. Now, some of the talk on trying to shut this down goes back to some of it last year. This was during a meeting between President Biden and CCP leader Xi Jinping in California. Now, according to a White House readout from that meeting last year, they said this: President Biden and President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China announced the resumption of bilateral cooperation on counter-narcotics, with a focus on reducing the flow of precursor chemicals, the ingredients essentially, fueling illicit fentanyl and synthetic drug trafficking. For years, bilateral cooperation on counter-narcotics has been suspended. The PRC, People's Republic of China, is now taking law enforcement action against illicit precursor suppliers, has issued a notice to industries warning Chinese companies against illicit trade in precursor chemicals and pill press equipment, and has committed to restart key law enforcement cooperation. Doesn't seem that happened. The success of that whole thing rests on the Chinese Communist Party. That's the problem. And according to NPR, a senior official from the administration who briefed NPR after that U.S.-China meeting said that they have to see whether China follows through on this and whether these efforts will succeed to disrupt the fentanyl trade, as they hoped it would. Again, not only does the Chinese Communist Party run this as a drug war operation mainly targeted the United States, they use it to create government corruption throughout Latin America, which they then capitalize on to take advantage of these countries. They use it to develop, again, smuggling networks, which they can use to bring other things into Latin America or the United States. The Chinese, they also do the money laundering. They also get directly involved with some of the actual drug operations. And of course, the Chinese regime allows this mass production of these chemicals to take place in China, and they're still the major source of all of this. Now, again, the whole operation to try to shut this down, it goes back to a few key points. whether or not the Chinese Communist Party is going to be willing to stop the drug trafficking crisis. Because the real problem, again, isn't law enforcement. It's not that they have these companies producing and they're actually trying to shut it down. The real problem is the Chinese Communist Party itself is directly involved in running the drug crisis. In fact, according to a report on the CCP's role in the fentanyl crisis released by the House Select Committee on the CCP, they said the Chinese regime has an active role in facilitating the export of fentanyl. In fact, here are a few of their key findings on what the Chinese Communist Party does. It notes this: the CCP directly subsidizes the manufacturing and export of illicit fentanyl materials and other synthetic narcotics through tax rebates. Many of these substances are illegal under the PRC's own laws and have no known legal use worldwide. So the CCP, while saying it's illegal in China, subsidizes the very thing they say is illegal. And notes they gave monetary grants and awards to companies openly trafficking illicit fentanyl materials and other synthetic narcotics. The CCP encourages it, in other words. And notes the CCP holds ownership interest in several PRC companies tied to drug trafficking. This includes a PRC government prison connected to human rights abuses, owning a drug trafficking chemical company, and a publicly traded PRC company hosting thousands of instances of open drug trafficking on its sites. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't just subsidize it, doesn't just encourage it. The CCP is actually directly involved with one of the main companies that does this. And notes the Chinese Communist Party fails to prosecute fentanyl and precursor manufacturers. And notes that rather than investigating drug traffickers, PRC, read that CCP Security Services, have not cooperated with U.S. law enforcement and have even notified targets of U.S. investigations when they received a request for assistance. And so you wonder why the DEA is shutting down its offices in China. Maybe it's because when they actually investigate things and they communicate with the CCP on their investigations, when they move to make arrests or whatever else, the Chinese Communist Party takes the information they got, goes behind their backs, and alerts the traffickers. The CCP works with the criminals and uses its line to the DEA and other law enforcement officials to, again, just basically subvert them, to listen in on their communications and then feed that to criminal groups so the criminal groups are protected by the Chinese Communist Party. It notes as well, the CCP allows the open sale of fentanyl precursors and other illicit materials on the extensively monitored and controlled PRC internet. You can't criticize, for example, the Chinese Communist Party. You can't talk about democracy. You can't talk about human rights abuses. But for some reason, you can sell drugs. You can run these markets. And notes a review of just 7 e-commerce sites found over 31,000 instances of PRC companies selling illicit chemicals with obvious ties to drug trafficking. And notes the Chinese Communist Party strategically and economically benefits from the fentanyl crisis. The fentanyl crisis has helped the CCP-tied Chinese organized criminal groups to become the world's premier money launderers, enriched the PRC's chemical industry, and has had a devastating impact on Americans. They are killing more Americans every single year using drug warfare than have died in major wars. They kill more Americans every single year than died in the entire Vietnam War. The Chinese Communist Party regards this as a form of war. They profit from it. They create networks of corruption for it. They work with American law enforcement only to listen in on them and use the information to protect their criminal networks, because the CCP is running, subsidizing, protecting, and even encouraging these criminal networks. And as the report notes as well, quote, the PRC government, the People's Republic of China, read that, the CCP, has the means to stop illicit fentanyl materials manufacturers, yet it continually fails to do so for those engaged in illegal activities. It runs the most advanced techno-totalitarian surveillance state in human history, and by its own rhetoric, has developed an omnipresent digital and physical surveillance state that leaves criminals with nowhere to hide. yet it has failed to pursue flagrant violations of its own laws. The CCP will go after people, for example, talking about Taiwan independence, but they won't go after the criminals killing 100,000 Americans a year. Now, as we've discussed, the Chinese Communist Party's operations for what it calls drug warfare tie again into its own programs. The Chinese Communist Party actually has this listed under its unrestricted warfare doctrine. It openly regards this as a form of war. It openly uses it. In fact, as I briefly mentioned, the program goes back to former CCP leader Mao Zedong, who created these networks, who worked with Cuba to create drug trafficking networks all throughout Latin America, who built these networks and then used them both to undermine the United States, to poison our youth, to create crime and chaos, and to profit off it the entire time they did it. And it also gives them a foothold and some degree of control within various organized criminal networks, including street gangs. Now look, we'll see what happens with this. DEA, again, is closing these 2 offices. We'll see what comes out. More information has been being released on these networks. Now the CCP ties into it. I'll keep you updated on that. But in other news, the United States Air Force also is warning of the growing threats from the Chinese regime.